After about a year and a half, Rob finally got his residence permit. Our favorite part was where the woman who handed him the permit, she looked at the card and said, this isn't a really good photo of you. I just love the directness of the Greeks. I love it. Welcome to Writer Reader. I am Eleni. I also began Greek lessons again. My weakness in Greek is definitely grammar. But today we're going to be discussing Junot Diaz's award-winning book, The Brief Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde. I read it actually a few months ago. I found Junot Diaz through a short story collection, The Best American Short Stories. I picked up his short story collection called Drown and loved that. So then I decided to read this book. The book follows, among other people, a young Dominican American boy named Oscar, who is kind of awkward and, as the author describes him, a ghetto nerd. He's interested in comic books and fantasy and is working on his own sci-fi fantasy novel. He wants love so badly and fears dying a virgin. The book also explores his family members and the past and some of their life experiences in the Dominican Republic under the dictatorship of Rafael Trujillo. The novel contains some elements of magical realism, which I love, and it's considered speculative fiction. The family is also living under the shadows of the so-called Foucault curse. The Foucault curse began in Western Africa and traveled to the Caribbean by boat, reportedly kept alive by the screams of enslaved people. This novel won numerous awards in 2008 when it was published, including the Pulitzer Prize. Of the book, I really like this New York Times book review description. Tale of Oscar's coming of age is in some ways the book's thinnest layer, a young adult melodrama draped over a multi-generational immigrant family chronicle that dabbles in tropical magical realism, punk rock feminism, hip-hop machismo, postmodern pyrotechnics, and enough polymorphous multiculturalism to fill up an introduction to cultural studies syllabus. It's a mouthful. The narrator's omniscient. We don't really know who it is until later, and it turns out to be, this isn't a spoiler, it's in many of the reviews, Junior, who was a once boyfriend of Oscar's sister, and also his roommate, who tries to help him out with the ladies. Junot Diaz was born in the Dominican Republic, but he grew up in New Jersey. He co-founded the Voices of Our Nation workshop in 1999, which is an organization that attempts to elevate writers of color. He's won many awards, including the MacArthur Genius Grant. He's also the fiction editor for the Boston Review. He learned to write from women writers. He was looking for the sense of intimacy that he wasn't finding in many male authors. And so he lists a great number of women authors who influenced him, which I'll include in the link below. He likes to write in exact rooms during exact hours. He knows other people don't necessarily need to do that, but he really, for him to write, that's necessary. And so his hours are from 7 a.m. until about noon, unless he's feeling really inspired, then he'll keep going. He does not have a daily word count, but he says he probably should. In the morning, if he starts talking or having a conversation, he said he loses his writing space. His mind goes to another place. It's similar to other authors I've covered who've said this, and I myself feel this way too. If I'm either writing messages or if I'm talking to somebody, I do lose some kind of that sense of just this mystical kind of, it's almost like you've been in a silent treat because you've been by yourself in your head all night, and then you come fresh to this page and it's nice to just be there without any sort of outside thought. Is it what Oates was talking about in last week's video, this subsuming of self? Is it this need to sort of take yourself out of the process, and maybe it helps not to talk to people? One thing that struck me is something he said about the process of writing a book. The new requires you to be completely lost, to have no bearings. If you feel like you know where you're at, somebody's already done it. And he also has advice for writers on submitting their work to literary journals. So many writers that I encounter send their work in so soon. It shows. It really does. While he's writing, he also listens to movie soundtracks. He says, I can't listen to any music that has words in it, so soundtracks are good for this. I wrote my first book listening to the soundtrack to the movie Conan the Barbarian on a loop. That's how I ride. The other kind of unusual thing is, rather than being at a desk, he either stands or lies in bed. He was also asked about if he plans or plots, the whole pantser question, and he said, it seems that I have a different strategy for each book. All three require different approaches. I do a lot of groundwork beforehand, creating maps and patterns that I'll use later on. It's a mixture of both. I do some plotting, but of course, stuff changes on the fly. And I love this last bit of advice that he has for aspiring writers. The whole culture is telling you to hurry, while the art tells you to take your time. Always listen to the art. This, just how he wrote this book, to me is kind of inspiring. It's not really Schadenfreude, but this sense that you can sort of commiserate and know that you're not alone in the misery of trying to put a book together. He says it took him 11 years to write this book, and because he felt like he was doing something new, that's why it was hard. He really struggled, and he thought that maybe his talent had been maxed out. Of this, he said, "So I put the manuscript away, all of the hundreds of failed pages, boxed and hidden in a closet. I think I cried as I did it. 5 years of my life and the dream that I had of myself, all down the tubes because I couldn't pull off something other people seem to pull off with relative ease, a novel. By then I wasn't even interested in a great American novel. I would have been elated with the eminently forgettable New Jersey novel." Later he says, "I dug out the manuscript. I figured if I could find one good thing in the pages, I would go back to it. Just one good thing, like flipping a coin. I'd let the pages decide, spend the whole night reading everything I'd written. And guess what? It was still terrible. In fact, with the new distance, the lameness was even worse than I'd thought." I kind of laughed when I heard that. Yet he persevered. "There were no sudden miracles. It took 2 more years of heartbreak, of being utterly, dismayingly lost before the novel I had dreamed about for all those years finally started revealing itself. And another 3 years after that before I can look up from my desk and say the word I'd wanted to say for more than a decade. Done. I didn't become a writer the first time I put pen to paper when I finished my first book, Easy, or my second one, Hard. You see, in my view, a writer is a writer not because she writes well and easily, because she has amazing talent, because everything she does is golden. In my view, a writer is a writer because even when there is no hope, even when nothing you do shows any sign of promise, you keep writing anyway. Wasn't until that night when I was faced with all those lousy pages that I really realized, what it was exactly that I am." And the last quote about this book is, "The secret plot of the entire book was that I set out to chart the political and sexual terror of Trujillo and how this haunted a family across 3 generations. The character that most came through was this total nerd, the absolute opposite of what in the Dominican Republic would be considered a stereotypical man. This is a great person to begin with because Oscar seems completely ahistorical, completely New Jersey, and yet I wanted to show that this dictatorship, looming and yet almost forgotten, made him possible." Speaking of dictatorships, that's not really a good transition, but I think that this book would pair really well with this particular food. I burnt it just a little bit. This is my schnitzel garden gourmet. It's very delicious. Okay. Hot. Ouch, ouch.
No steam more.
So my impressions of the book, I loved it. I love the language, the musicality of it. I love the Spanish, the Spanglish, the slang, all of that, even though it takes a little more work to figure out sometimes what's being said. It's just something that you find, unexpected. I also learned a lot about the Dominican Republic and what they went through with the dictatorship, things that I hadn't been taught in school, or if I was taught, I do not remember them. And just to give you a sense of the language in the book, I'm going to go ahead and read an opening passage. "Ghetto Nerd at the End of the World" is the title. "Our hero was not one of those Dominican cats everybody's always going on about. He wasn't no home run hitter or a fly bacatero, not a playboy with a million hots on his jock. And except for one period early in his life, dude never had much luck with the females. How very un-Dominican of him. He was 7 then." So what did you think? Have you read any Junot Diaz? Do you like his style of writing? Do you think that this struggle, is that something that you've also felt? Do you agree that in this culture of speed, that this slowness of art is something valuable? So I think the protagonist, if we're going to go with Oscar here, he could really use this today. I am continuing on the truth seeking, which is researching different aspects. So I was researching this last week about different cults that have appeared mostly in the USA. One was interesting. I did not know that the Oneida Silverware Company was started by a cult back in the 1800s. So yes, so I'm doing that, and I hope to. I'm very anxious to get started with the book again. What about you? How is your book going? Let me know in the comments. Thank you again for tuning in with me, and I do hope to see you next week.